Welcome to Sci-Fi Verse. Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on new videos, and enjoy the listening. The stars were just beginning to pierce through the twilight as Dr. Alice Morgan set up her telescope on the hill overlooking Clearwater, California. It was a small town, but from here the entire universe seemed to open up before her. As the leading astrophysicist at the Pacific Space Observatory, Alice spent countless nights searching for answers among the stars, but tonight felt different. Tonight, something was coming. A deep unease had settled over her ever since she received the coordinates from a colleague in New Mexico. The strange signal they detected was moving rapidly toward Earth. It wasn't just the speed that was unusual, but the signal itself a series of organized, intelligent frequencies unlike any cosmic noise they'd encountered before. Alice's fingers trembled slightly as she aligned the telescope. Her eyes widened as the image on her screen sharpened a sleek, metallic object hurtling through space at an impossible speed. It was no asteroid or space debris, this was something far more advanced. Her pulse quickened. This can't be, she whispered, fumbling for her phone. She needed to call Dr. Bernard, the director of the observatory. He had to see this. Before she could dial, a blinding flash lit up the night sky, followed by a deep, resonant hum that shook the ground beneath her feet. Alice looked up, her heart racing, as the object decelerated, hovering just beyond the atmosphere, silent and foreboding. It was as if time itself paused. A voice, if it could be called a voice, echoed in her mind. It was calm, melodic, yet utterly alien. We come in peace, inhabitants of Earth. We seek knowledge and friendship. Alice staggered back, dropping her phone. The voice bypassed her ears entirely, resonating directly within her mind. It was soothing, but the very fact that it had invaded her thoughts filled her with dread. Within moments, the message was relayed to every human on Earth. Televisions, radios, and smartphones crackled with static before displaying the same serene image of a peaceful starship hovering above the planet. The world was no longer the same. 3 days later, the alien ship landed. It touched down in the vast desert near the Grand Canyon, a remote location chosen to minimize human casualties should anything go wrong. The governments of the world had formed an unprecedented coalition to address the visitors. Military forces from the United States, Russia, China, and other nations surrounded the landing site, their weapons trained on the alien craft, ready for anything. But the air was thick with tension, not hostility. Alice was among the select few scientists and diplomats invited to the landing site. As she stood next to Dr. Bernard, she felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The silence was oppressive, and the stares of soldiers and scientists only amplified her anxiety. As they waited, Alice's mind raced through the past few days. The media had whipped the public into a frenzy, speculating on the visitors' intentions. Some feared an invasion, while others believed it was the dawn of a new era. Alice found herself torn between excitement and caution. Something about this didn't feel right. Suddenly, a soft hiss broke the silence. A door appeared on the side of the ship, seamlessly sliding open. A ramp extended to the ground, and from the shadows emerged figures that were both familiar and foreign. The aliens were tall and slender, their skin a pale, iridescent blue that shimmered under the desert sun. Their faces were delicate, almost ethereal, with large, almond-shaped eyes that exuded kindness. They wore simple, flowing garments and moved with an otherworldly grace. The leader of the group stepped forward, her eyes locking onto Alice with an unsettling intensity. "We are the Solari," she said, her voice soft yet resonant. "I am Luriel, the emissary of our people. We have come to learn from you, to share our knowledge, and to forge an alliance between our worlds." Dr. Bernard stepped forward, clearing his throat. "I am Dr. Bernard, director of the Pacific Space Observatory. We welcome you to Earth. But we must ask, why now? Why have you chosen to contact us?" Luriel smiled a serene, disarming smile. "We have been watching your world for many of your cycles. We have seen your progress, your struggles, your triumphs. We believe now is the time for our peoples to meet, to grow together." Alice felt a strange mix of emotions. The Solari were peaceful and intelligent, seemingly eager to cooperate. But there was something about Luriel's gaze, something about the way she seemed to peer into Alice's very soul, that made her uneasy. As the conversation continued, diplomats from various countries stepped forward, introducing themselves, asking questions, and beginning the delicate process of establishing interspecies relations. But Alice's focus was elsewhere. She caught sight of something that made her blood run cold. Baxter, her cat, had slipped out of her bag and was prowling near the alien ship. Baxter, she hissed, her heart racing. The last thing she needed was her curious cat causing a diplomatic incident. But when she tried to approach him, Baxter's reaction surprised her. His fur bristled, and a low, guttural growl rumbled from his throat. Alice had never seen him act this way. It sent a shiver down her spine. She quickly scooped him up, feeling his tense, rigid body against her. "I'm so sorry," she said, glancing nervously at Luriel, who remained unfazed. "It is no trouble," Luriel replied with a gentle smile. "We understand your bond with your companion creatures. We have observed this in your species. Your pets, as you call them, are curious beings." "Doctor," Bernard interjected, "you might want to be cautious around our animals. They can be unpredictable." Alice nodded, trying to calm Baxter, but he continued to hiss, his eyes locked on the Solari ship. It was unnerving, and she couldn't shake the feeling that Baxter knew something they didn't. The following days were a whirlwind of meetings, negotiations, and scientific exchanges. The Solari shared their advanced technology with humanity, demonstrating incredible feats of engineering, medicine, and energy production. Diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries were cured overnight. Poverty and hunger were addressed with technology that seemed like magic. But Alice's unease grew. Baxter's behavior had become increasingly erratic since the Zolari's arrival. He would hiss and growl at seemingly nothing, his eyes always fixed on the Zolari ship whenever it was in view. And he wasn't the only pet behaving strangely. Reports trickled in from around the world: dogs barking at empty spaces, birds refusing to sing, cats becoming aggressive for no apparent reason. Alice voiced her concerns during a meeting with Dr. Bernard and the other scientists. "There's something about these Solari that's affecting our animals," she said, her voice tinged with worry. "Baxter hasn't been himself since they arrived. And it's not just him, there are reports from all over." "Doctor." Bernard looked skeptical. "Alice, I understand your concern, but we're dealing with an advanced species here. It's unlikely that our pets could sense something that we, with all our technology, cannot." Alice's frustration bubbled over. "But what if they can? Animals are more sensitive to certain things than we are. What if they're picking up on something we're missing?" Dr. Ramirez, a behavioral scientist, nodded thoughtfully. "It's possible. Animals have been known to sense earthquakes before they happen, and they can detect environmental changes we're oblivious to. It wouldn't be the first time they've noticed something we haven't." Dr. Bernard sighed, clearly torn. "Even if that's true, what are we supposed to do? We can't exactly tell the Solari to leave because our pets are uncomfortable." Alice's determination hardened. "We can investigate. We need to understand what's going on, and if our animals can help us do that, then we should pay attention." "Doctor." Bernard hesitated, then nodded. "All right, Alice, look into it. But be discreet. We don't want to alarm our guests." Alice left the meeting with a mix of frustration and resolve. Something was wrong, and she was determined to find out what. That evening, Alice sat in her quarters, poring over the data she had collected from the Solari's technology. Baxter sat on the desk beside her, his tail flicking back and forth with agitation. He hadn't calmed down since their return from the landing site, and Alice's concern was growing. As she worked, her computer beeped with a new notification. It was a report from a colleague in New Mexico, detailing strange energy readings near the Solari ship. The readings were similar to those Alice had noticed but hadn't fully understood. "Baxter," she muttered, reaching out to scratch his head, but he recoiled, his eyes fixed on the screen. "What's wrong with you?" Suddenly, Baxter leapt off the desk, darting toward the door. He scratched at it frantically, as if desperate to escape. Alice followed him, opening the door to let him out. But instead of running off, Baxter crouched low to the ground, his ears flattened as he stared down the hallway. Alice's heart raced. She knew that Baxter had seen something, but there was nothing there. Just the empty corridor. Or so it seemed. She grabbed a flashlight and followed Baxter, who darted ahead, leading her down the hall toward the exit that led to the Solari ship. As they approached, the air grew thick with a strange electric charge, and Alice felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. Baxter stopped at the door leading outside, hissing at it furiously. Alice hesitated, her hand on the doorknob. Every instinct told her to turn back, but something pushed her forward. She opened the door and stepped outside. The Solari ship loomed in the distance, its sleek surface reflecting the moonlight. The strange energy field she had detected earlier was now more intense, pulsing in rhythm with the ship's hum. Baxter hissed again, his fur bristling as he stared at the ship. Alice felt a chill run down her spine. What was he sensing? She took a step forward, her eyes locked on the ship. But as she did, Baxter bolted toward it, moving faster than she had ever seen him move before. Baxter, no, Alice called after him, but he was already halfway to the ship. Panic surged through her, and she sprinted after him, her heart pounding. She couldn't lose him, he was her only family, her closest companion. As she neared the ship, she saw Baxter dart underneath it, disappearing from view. Baxter, she called, her voice trembling. She dropped to her knees, peering under the ship's hull, but the darkness swallowed everything. Suddenly, a low hum filled the air, and the ground beneath her began to vibrate. The energy field around the ship pulsed with a new intensity, and Alice felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Then she heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible growl, but it wasn't coming from Baxter. It was coming from the ship. Alice scrambled back, her breath catching in her throat. The ship seemed to shift, its surface rippling as if it were alive. The air around her grew heavy, charged with static, and she could feel her hair beginning to rise as though a storm was about to break. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Before she could react, the ground beneath her erupted in a blinding flash of light. The force of the blast sent her flying backward, and she landed hard on the ground, gasping for air. She could feel the warmth of the explosion on her skin, yet somehow she wasn't injured. The energy seemed to have washed over her, leaving her dazed but unharmed. When the light faded, she saw the ship's energy field flickering erratically, as if it were struggling to maintain its form. The hum grew louder, more discordant, and the ship began to shake violently, groaning as its structure strained under an unseen force. Alice tried to stand, but her legs were weak, and her vision was blurry. She could barely make out Baxter's silhouette emerging from beneath the ship, his fur standing on end. He wasn't alone. Dozens of other animals, cats, dogs, birds were converging on the ship, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. They surrounded the ship, their growls and hisses filling the air as they stared at the alien vessel with an intensity that was both eerie and awe-inspiring. Alice watched in stunned silence as the animals began to move in unison, their bodies aligning with the ship's energy field. The field pulsed again. But this time the animals seemed to absorb the energy, their bodies glowing brighter with each pulse. The ship shuddered, its surface cracking as the energy field began to collapse inward. The Solari inside must have realized what was happening, because the ship's engines roared to life, trying to escape the animals' grasp. But it was too late. With a final, deafening screech, the ship imploded, collapsing into itself before disintegrating into a cloud of dust. The animals remained still, their eyes glowing faintly as they watched the last remnants of the Solari ship vanish into the night. Alice could hardly believe what she had witnessed. Her heart raced as she crawled toward Baxter, who now stood calmly at the edge of the smoldering crater, his eyes returning to their normal state. "What? What just happened?" she whispered, reaching out to stroke his fur. Baxter purred softly, nuzzling her hand as if nothing had happened, his earlier aggression melting away. Alice's mind was spinning. The animals had destroyed the Solari ship, had somehow harnessed the alien energy and turned it against them. The warnings had been right. The Solari had underestimated Earth's pets, dismissing them as harmless. But they were far from harmless. They were protectors. She scooped Baxter into her arms, holding him close as she gazed out at the crater. The other animals began to disperse, returning to their homes as if nothing had occurred. But Alice knew better. They had saved humanity. The aftermath of the destruction left the world in a state of shock. News of the Solari ship's sudden disappearance spread quickly, but the true story remained hidden, known only to a few. The world believed that the Solari had left voluntarily, but Alice and the others knew the truth. The Solari had been defeated, not by human technology or military might, but by the very creatures they had ignored, Earth's pets. Alice spent the following days researching what had happened, trying to understand how the animals had harnessed the energy and turned it against the Solari. She found that the pets had a unique sensitivity to the alien energy, one that allowed them to disrupt it in ways that no human could have anticipated. She also discovered that the Solari had underestimated more than just the pets. They had underestimated the bond between humans and their animal companions. A bond that transcended words and reason, rooted in instinct and loyalty. But the more Alice delved into the mystery, the more questions she uncovered. How had the pets developed such abilities? Was it something inherent to them, or had they been altered by the presence of the Solari? And most importantly, were the pets aware of what they had done? To answer these questions, Alice began conducting a series of experiments. She collected data from pets across the country, analyzing their behavior, brain activity, and interactions with the remnants of the alien energy. What she found was both fascinating and unsettling. The animals seemed to share a collective consciousness, a network of communication that allowed them to coordinate their actions without verbal or physical cues. This network was strongest when they were in close proximity to the alien energy, but traces of it remained even after the Solari ship was destroyed. Alice's mind raced with possibilities. Could this network be a form of intelligence? Were the pets capable of understanding their actions, or were they merely responding to an external stimulus? The implications were staggering. But as Alice continued her research, she began to notice something else, something that sent a chill down her spine. The animals were watching her. It started with Baxter. He would sit in the corner of the room, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. At first, she dismissed it as a coincidence, but soon she realized that other animals were behaving the same way. Dogs would stop and stare as she passed by, their eyes tracking her every move. Birds would perch on her windowsill, watching her with an unsettling focus. Alice tried to ignore it, telling herself that it was just her imagination. But deep down, she knew something had changed. The animals were different now. They had seen something, experienced something that had altered them in ways she couldn't fully understand. And they were keeping a close eye on her. As Alice continued her research, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something even more dangerous than the Solari. The animals seemed to sense it too. Their behavior grew more erratic, more intense, as if they were preparing for a battle that only they could see. Alice's fears were confirmed when she received a message from Dr. Bernard. Strange signals had been detected in deep space, signals similar to those that had preceded the arrival of the Solari. But these signals were different. They were stronger, more chaotic, as if they were tearing through space itself. Alice's heart sank. The invaders were coming back. She knew that humanity wasn't ready for another encounter. The Solari had been powerful, but they had underestimated Earth's defenses. The next wave of invaders wouldn't make the same mistake. They would come prepared, armed with technology that humanity had never seen before. Alice had to act quickly. She gathered her data and reached out to her colleagues, sharing her findings and urging them to prepare for the worst. But as she did, she couldn't shake the feeling that the animals were one step ahead of her. They knew what was coming, and they were ready to fight. Baxter was particularly restless. He would pace around the house, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. At night, he would sit by the window, staring out into the darkness as if waiting for something. Alice tried to comfort him, but she knew that he was preparing for a battle that she couldn't comprehend. The tension in the air was palpable as the days passed. The signals from space grew stronger, closer, and the world braced itself for the inevitable. Governments around the globe mobilized their military forces, preparing for an invasion that seemed increasingly likely. But as the world waited in fear, the animals remained calm, focused. They had a plan, a strategy that Alice could only guess at, and she knew that when the time came, they would be ready to defend the planet once more. The invasion began in the early hours of the morning. Alice was jolted awake by a deafening roar that shook the walls of her house. She stumbled out of bed, her heart pounding as she tried to make sense of the chaos around her. The sky outside was lit up with flashes of light, and the air was filled with the sound of distant explosions. Baxter was already at the door, his fur bristling as he stared out into the darkness. Alice followed his gaze, and what she saw made her blood run cold. Massive ships, unlike anything she had ever seen, were descending from the sky. They were sleek and angular, their surfaces bristling with weapons that glowed with a malevolent energy. The invaders had arrived, and they were here to finish what the Solari had started. Alice knew that there was no time to waste. She grabbed her laptop and rushed outside, Baxter following close behind. The streets were filled with people running in panic, their faces twisted in fear as they tried to escape the destruction raining down from above. But as Alice looked closer, she realized that not everyone was running. Scattered among the crowd were animals, cats, dogs, birds standing still, their eyes fixed on the approaching ships. They were waiting, just like Baxter had been. Alice's heart raced as she realized what was happening. The animals were preparing to fight back, just as they had before. But this time the stakes were higher. The invaders were more powerful, more determined, and the animals were humanity's last line of defense. She watched in awe as the animals began to move, their bodies glowing with the same unnatural light that she had seen during the destruction of the Solari ship. They moved as one, a coordinated force that defied logic and reason. It was as if they were connected by an invisible thread, a network of communication that allowed them to anticipate each other's actions. The first wave of invaders didn't stand a chance. As the ships descended, the animals unleashed a barrage of energy that tore through the alien defenses. The ships exploded in midair, their fragments raining down on the city below. But the invaders were relentless. For every ship that fell, two more took its place. The sky was filled with a dizzying array of lights and explosions as the battle raged on. Alice could only watch in stunned silence as the animals fought with a ferocity that she had never seen before. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they fought with a determination that seemed almost superhuman. But even as they fought, Alice could see that the battle was taking its toll. The animals were growing weaker, their movements slower, as the invaders pressed their advantage. The glow in their eyes was fading, and Alice knew that they couldn't keep this up forever. Baxter was among them, his small body darting between the legs of the larger animals as he fought to hold the line. Alice's heart ached as she watched him, knowing that there was nothing she could do to help. The invaders were closing in, their ships descending lower and lower as they prepared for the final strike. The animals were surrounded, their backs against the wall, and Alice knew that the end was near. But just as all hope seemed lost, something miraculous happened. The sky above them split open, and a beam of light descended from the heavens, bathing the battlefield in a warm golden glow. The animals paused, their eyes wide with wonder as the light washed over them. And then they began to change. Their bodies glowed brighter, their movements faster and more precise. The invaders faltered, their ships stuttering as they tried to react to the sudden shift in the battle. Alice watched in awe as the animals fought with renewed strength, their attacks more coordinated, more devastating. It was as if they had been given a second wind, a new surge of energy that allowed them to turn the tide of the battle. The invaders were overwhelmed, their ships torn apart by the relentless assault. One by one, they fell, their fragments disintegrating into the air as the animals pressed their advantage. And then, it was over. The last ship exploded in a blinding flash of light, and the battlefield fell silent. The animals stood victorious, their bodies still glowing with the energy that had saved them. They had done it. They had defeated the invaders and saved humanity once again. In the aftermath of the battle, the world was left to grapple with the reality of what had happened. The animals had once again saved humanity from an alien threat, and the implications of their actions were staggering. Governments and scientists around the world scrambled to understand the phenomenon, but the answers remained elusive. The animals had tapped into a power that defied explanation, a force that seemed to exist beyond the realm of human understanding. Alice continued her research, trying to piece together the puzzle. She spent countless hours analyzing the data she had collected, searching for any clues that might explain the animals' abilities. But no matter how hard she tried, the answers remained just out of reach. The animals themselves offered no insight. They had returned to their normal behavior, their eyes no longer glowing with the unnatural light that had saved them. It was as if they had forgotten the battle, or perhaps they had simply moved on. But Alice knew better. She had seen the way they had fought, the way they had coordinated their actions. They had saved the world, and she was determined to understand how. As the weeks passed, Alice found herself spending more and more time with Baxter. He had been her companion through it all, and she felt a deep sense of gratitude and love for him. But she couldn't help but wonder if he knew more than he was letting on. One evening, as they sat together by the window, Alice reached out to stroke Baxter's fur. "You saved us," she whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "You and the others. How did you do it?" Baxter purred softly, nuzzling her hand as if to reassure her. But his eyes, those deep, knowing eyes, seemed to hold the answers she sought. Alice sighed, leaning back in her chair as she gazed out at the stars. "I wish I could understand," she said softly. "I wish I could know what you were thinking, what you were feeling." Baxter remained silent, his gaze never leaving hers. And in that moment, Alice felt a connection that went beyond words, beyond logic or reason. It was a connection rooted in trust, in love, in the bond they shared. Perhaps that was the answer she had been searching for all along. The world might never fully understand what had happened, how the animals had saved them. But Alice knew that it didn't matter. What mattered was that they had fought, they had protected, and they had won. And that, she realized, was enough. As the world began to rebuild in the wake of the invasion, a new era of cooperation and understanding emerged. Governments, scientists, and civilians alike were united by the knowledge that they were not alone in the universe, and that Earth's true protectors were far closer to home than anyone had realized. Alice's research took on a new focus. She began working with teams of scientists and animal behaviorists to study the unique abilities that Earth's pets had displayed during the invasions. What they discovered was nothing short of groundbreaking. The animals had a heightened sensitivity to certain frequencies and frequencies that were closely aligned with the signals emitted by the Solari and the invaders. This sensitivity allowed them to detect and respond to the alien threats in ways that humans could not. But more than that, the animals possessed a unique form of communication, a telepathic network that allowed them to share information and coordinate their actions. This network was not limited to a single species, it extended across the animal kingdom, linking cats, dogs, birds, and even marine life in a complex web of communication. Alice was fascinated by these discoveries, but she was also aware of their implications. If the animals had developed these abilities in response to the alien threats, what did that mean for the future? Were they evolving to protect the planet from further invasions? And if so, how would humanity fit into this new dynamic? These questions weighed heavily on Alice's mind as she continued her work. She knew that the world had changed in ways that were still being understood, and that humanity's relationship with the animals had entered a new and uncharted territory. But she also knew that they had to be prepared. The invaders had been defeated, but there was no guarantee that they wouldn't return or that other threats wouldn't emerge. Humanity had to be ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, and that meant working with the animals, not against them. Alice began collaborating with military leaders and strategists, helping to develop new defense protocols that incorporated the animals' unique abilities. They established special units of trained animals, cats, dogs, and even birds who would serve as early warning systems and first responders in the event of another alien invasion. These units, known as the Guardian Forces, were stationed around the world, ready to spring into action at a moment's notice. They were the first line of defense, and their presence provided a sense of security that humanity had never known before. But the Guardian Forces were more than just a military asset. They were a symbol of the bond between humans and animals, a bond that had been strengthened by the trials they had faced together. They represented hope, resilience, and the belief that even in the darkest of times, there was always a way forward. As Alice watched the Guardian Forces grow and evolve, she felt a sense of pride and purpose that she had never known before. She knew that the world was safer now, that they were better prepared for whatever the future might bring. But she also knew that there was still much to learn, much to discover. The animals had opened a door to a new understanding of the world, and it was up to humanity to walk through it. And as long as Baxter was by her side, she knew that they would be ready for whatever came next.